Joining us now is Wesley Bell. He is an American hero for reasons that I'm about to explain. He just won the case for the campaign, I should say, for St. Louis County prosecutor. He won the Democratic primary. He's running unopposed in the general election, so that means he will be the St. Louis County prosecutor. First of all, Wesley, welcome to the Young Turks.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm a big fan.
Thank you, thank you. So there's two main things that I want to talk to you about: is how you did this, how you won the election, and also what your plan and vision for criminal justice reform in St. Louis is. So let's handle the first one right out of the gate. You beat Bob McCullough. We labeled McCullough the jerk of the year in 2014, and there was heavy competition that year, as there is every year. And out of all the terrible things that people did in that year, I thought McCullough, basically as the prosecutor throwing the case against the officer who shot Mike Brown, was the worst thing that happened that year, because he actually allowed the witnesses to lie. In the grand jury, the prosecutor was supposed to prosecute. Instead, he presented the defense, basically. And we at the Young Turks were looking forward to his defeat for a long, long time, and you made that happen. So first, thank you. Okay. Secondly, tell us how you did it, because he was an incumbent there for decades. So how did you unseat him?
First and foremost, you gotta be willing to do the work. And I said first, when what I'm about to say is just as important. You have to make sure you surround yourself with people who are good people, who are competent, and who are willing to do the work. One thing that I've always said about campaigns is that you have to be willing to do everything from sweeping the floors to high-level policy analysis and creation and everything in between. And we had a great group of people that just worked their tails off right here in our office. It's late, so everyone's gone home at this point. But a lot of long hours, a lot of hard work. We looked at the votes. We knew where we needed to get our turnout, and we executed that plan. And I'm really proud of the great group of people that we had working, volunteering, and just getting involved in this campaign.
So, but there's a couple of principles that you talked about earlier that I'm really curious about. You said, don't assume you know who the voters are, and redefine voter outreach. What do you mean by those two comments?
Well, I think that oftentimes, for example, when you see polling is going to look at who are your likely voters. And when you're running a grassroots campaign or running against a 27-year incumbent, as we were in this election, you have to look outside the box. You have to get turnout in places that typically don't bring out turnout. And that's what we did. We focused on those areas that we knew that we could get out if we went out and reached out to them, I should say. And so that's exactly what we did. We went into areas such as Mid-County and North County, which generally will have a low turnout. And we went and asked for those votes. And as a result, there was a record turnout. And we're really excited about that turnout and the excitement that was that we saw on election day. It's interesting that we had it was a rainy day, and normally that means a lower turnout, but we really weren't concerned because we knew that our voters, our base was excited, they were enthusiastic, and they were coming, and they did, and we appreciate all of them.
Oh, well, I love that justice came from McCullough on a rainy day in St. Louis one day. One more thing. I mean, I could talk to you all day about how you won, but one more question on that. You say that one of the keys is to run unapologetically progressive. Now, that is music to my ears, but counter to conventional wisdom. So why do you think that helps you win?
I believe in being a straight shooter. I think you have to let people know where you stand, and I think people respect that. One thing that when I worked on city council in Ferguson, I was elected in 2015, which was about 9 months after Ferguson became Ferguson, if you will. And one thing that I was always adamant about was I wanted to explain to people exactly my position so that if they agreed or disagreed, they knew where I stood. And this campaign was no different. I came out and I was honest about my positions on the death penalty, and that our office would not be filing death penalty cases. I was honest about my positions on cash bail and the need to reform the cash bail system, the need to expand diversionary programs for drug offenders and for those suffering with mental health. And so I'm not ashamed of my positions. I think it makes it a lot easier when you are honest about your positions. And as they say, if you are honest, if you're honest, you don't have to have a good memory.
That's right. So now let's talk about the reform that you're planning. You've had a really interesting experience throughout your life in different things that you've done in this regard. First of all, your dad was a police officer. Then you're now criminal justice professor. You're the head of that department in the college that you teach at. You're a public defender. So I mean, you've run the gamut here. So as the county prosecutor, what are your main priorities in criminal justice reform?
Well, I'll take that from a 10,000-foot level, and then we'll go into the weeds. First and foremost, we want to keep St. Louis County safer, obviously, but we also want to give second chances when appropriate. A really good friend of mine, a pastor, as a matter of fact, said that power without compassion is a devilish thing. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we can't prosecute our way out of addiction. We can't prosecute our way out of mental health. We have to treat those issues. And so first and foremost, we're going to expand those kind of programs, those diversionary programs, because when you give people the tools they need, they are less likely to offend. We're going to work with the local St. Louis County judges and reassess the cash bail system, which doesn't work, particularly with nonviolent offenders. We know that when people sit in jail, even for a short period of time, if they've never committed a crime, they are more likely to now commit a crime, even with just a short stay in jail. So we want to make sure that we are reassessing that system, which doesn't work. We want to also continue, and I'm a big advocate for community policing, and we want to continue to work with our local law enforcement so that they are pushing and continuing to push those reforms and implement community policing, and the list goes on.
So you also work with Obama's Department of Justice when you were a city councilman in the area, and what you guys did, I'm just going to read the list and then talk to me about what you think are the ones that were most effective and helped here. Thorough training for police, the purchase and use of body cams, a pay raise for police. That's interesting. People don't talk about that almost at all as part of the reforms that Obama brought in. Reforming police use of force policy and the overhaul of the municipal court system. So what do you think had the biggest impact among all those different things?
You know what? I mean, that's like asking me who my favorite kid is. I think that, the court system reform, the reforms that we implemented, and not just me, a lot of people contributed, that we implemented in court reform was huge because, without trust, you don't have a justice system. So I do think that that's important, but also the reforms that we brought with law enforcement and that training. I think those are so important as well. So it's kind of hard to say which is more or less important. These things all go hand in hand, and they help build that, our bridge that divide between law enforcement and many of our communities, and they're just all so important.
So I'm with you on that, but so for people who are not familiar with it, what does it mean to overhaul a municipal court system? Overhaul it to do what?
So we had to implement reforms. What we saw was a lot of courts using tickets for revenue purposes as opposed to using them for public safety. And that meant, as a municipal court judge, I would get a case that started off with one ticket, which should be $150 fine, but because a person missed court a few times, and the failure to appear fines would raise that. Now they're looking at $500-600, and some people are struggling to make ends meet, and they can't afford it. And so, one of the reforms that came about first in Ferguson, and then with the Senate Bill 5, was to remove the fines from failure to appears, and so giving people some relief. And being able to address those issues. And in the court that I was in, after August of 2014, we were the first court to do universal warrant withdrawal. So we gave everyone a second chance, gave them new court dates so they could come in and take care of their court-related matters. And then several months later, my court was the first to implement just universal dismissals for cases that were 3 to 5 years and older, not involving violence or a victim. And so those are some of the reforms that we were implementing back in 2014, 2015. And those are some of the things that were implemented in the consent decree, as well as some of the local Senate bills here that were passed as well. So not only affecting Ferguson, but the entire region in a positive way. And so there's still more to do, but we're still going to keep pushing.
All right, I want everybody to know the website. It's votewesleyBell.com, and the support still matters.
That's it.
And
Absolutely.
And volunteering still matters. That's how we won the race in the first place in the primaries, and donating, et cetera. I want everybody to know that. But Wesley, I can't help but ask one last question, because that's what I do. Okay, how did the police take the reform of the use of force policy? What was it before? What did you guys change it to? And how did the police react to it?
So with the consent decree, that was a lot of tedious work, being literally locked in a room with members of President Obama's Department of Justice and working out what these policies would look like. And so what we did was we had members of law enforcement, particularly Chief Andre Anderson at the time, and now Chief Moss, in the room to help us determine what the best policies were. And I think when we had the buy-in, when we had participation, I should say, from law enforcement, well, that brought the buy-in. So we had to sell it. We had to let our law enforcement officers know what that policy was. While it was being developed, we had members of law enforcement contributing to that policy. And so I think we had a lot of buy-in from our department in Ferguson, and we continue to have that buy-in, and not just with use of force, but also community engagement and so many things that are important to build that trust.
But what did it get changed to?
Oh, so use of force has to be in compliance with Tennessee versus Garner and Supreme Court rulings. And so I think more importantly, what we were looking at was a duty of candor. So if something did happen with force, that officers were required to report it and be honest about what happened. And if they are not, they are subject to termination. And not subject to, they will be terminated. And so to be clear, we didn't reinvent the use of force rules. We made sure that we were a constitutional department, that we were in compliance with the Constitution, and that our officers were following those policies and being honest. And again, so that means duty of candor, duty to report. And if they do not, they would be terminated.
It reminds me of Martin Luther King. He said, look, we call it civil disobedience, but the reality is we're in compliance with federal law. The people who are arresting us are the ones that are not in compliance with the law. So that's true. That was the law in the first place. It's the very least we can do is to help enforce it by the people whose job is to enforce the law. So Wesley Bell, thank you for participating in that. Thank you for going to get McCullough. Thank you for finishing the job. and thank you, I hope, for more criminal justice reform in the city of St. Louis and the county of St. Louis.
Hey, absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for what you all do. It's important to make sure that people are aware of what's going on across the country. So I appreciate that, and thanks for having me.